torchlight moves across gold, and the gold moves back. Two winged figures face each other across a lid of hammered metal, their heads bowed toward a space that holds nothing a person could touch. The flame gutters. The wings seem to shift, though nothing in the room is moving except the fire and the men who carry it. Barefoot priests come forward in the dark. They do not reach for the chest with their hands. Long poles run through rings on its sides, and the weight rides on their shoulders as they walk, slow, in step, breathing the way men breathe when they are afraid of dropping something that must not fall. The covered thing sways between them. The cloth over it is deep blue, then a hide of sea cow above that, and no eye in the room is allowed to see what lies beneath. They pass through a curtain woven with more of those same winged figures. Beyond it, there is no lamp. They set the chest down in a darkness so complete that even the high priest, on the one day a year he is permitted to enter, will come in behind a cloud of incense, so the smoke hides what his eyes were never meant to hold. Then the picture changes. The curtain is gone. The room is rubble and ash and open sky where a roof used to be. And on the floor, in the exact place where the chest once stood, there is a bare rectangle, clean stone, a little paler than the scorched slabs around it, the shape of something that rested there a long time and then was not there anymore. No one wrote down the day it left. That is the strange thing. This was the most carefully guarded object in the ancient world, followed across 4 centuries of one nation's history, and the record simply stops naming it. It does not say it was stolen. It does not say it was burned. It does not say it was carried into exile with the rest of the treasure. The trail runs hot and exact for a very long time, and then in a single generation, it goes cold. 3 things are worth holding on to before this story moves. The first is the exact verse where that trail ends, the last place the record sets the chest down with certainty, and the point after which no writer of scripture ever locates it again. The second is the 3 places it is said to rest today, 3 different claims made by 3 different traditions, and which one, if any, the biblical text itself leans toward. And the third is the thing almost no one asks, not where the ark went, what the ark actually was, because that answer turns out to matter more than any map. Hold those 3. This story comes back to each of them at the end. Begin where the record begins, at a mountain in the desert, with a box that had not yet frightened anyone. Nothing in the ancient world was tracked the way this chest was tracked. It was built at the foot of Sinai, to a specification given down to the cubit. Acacia wood overlaid inside and out with gold. A lid of solid gold with those 2 winged figures worked from the same piece, facing each other, wings arched over the empty space between them. Rings of gold at the 4 corners, and poles of acacia sheathed in gold run through the rings, and a standing command that the poles were never to be removed. It was made to be carried, and it was made never to be touched. From the moment it was finished, the text does not lose sight of it. When the nation broke camp, it did not simply travel in the baggage. It went first. A cloth of blue was laid over it, and the covering of hides, and it moved out ahead of the whole company. By a distance the writer bothers to record, so that the people could see the way they should go. When the people crossed the Jordan into the land they had been promised, the water is described piling up in a heap upstream, while the priests stood in the dry riverbed, holding the chest on their shoulders. and it did not move on until the last person had passed. At Jericho it went around the walls, once a day for 6 days, and 7 times on the 7th, carried in silence behind 7 priests with ram's horns. It was set down at Shiloh, and a tent was raised over it, and it stayed there through the years of the judges. When the nation went to war against the Philistines and was losing, they sent back for the chest and carried it into the camp, and the record even preserves the shout the army gave when it arrived, a roar so loud the ground is said to have shaken. Notice how much of that is bookkeeping. The distance it traveled ahead of the people is given as a set journey, so the eye could follow it. The order of the march is fixed, the chest going out and the people forming up behind it. When the covering was put on for travel, the writer names the fabrics in order, the blue cloth and then the hides. When it stopped, someone recorded that it stopped. When it moved, someone recorded that it moved, and even preserved the short prayer that was spoken as it set out, and the one that was spoken when it came to rest. A chest does not usually generate its own liturgy of departure and arrival. This one did, and the writers copied it all down. Such is the pattern, held for 4 centuries, every resting place named, every carrying accounted for, every failure to carry it correctly punished, and then written into the record as a warning. This is not how ancient texts treat objects. Crowns vanish without a sentence. Palaces burn in half a line. But this one chest is counted from campsite to campsite, named at river crossings and city gates and battlefields, its poles and its covering and its resting places all set down in order. The writers follow it the way a careful hand follows a thread through cloth, and they do not let go, which is exactly what makes the ending so difficult. A thing followed that closely does not simply disappear. When something tracked to the cubit falls out of the record without a word, the silence is not an accident of history. Somebody stopped writing about it on purpose, or somebody no longer knew what to write. And the story of which of those it was begins with the day the chest nearly destroyed the very people who carried it. It was never safe. That is the part the gold and the incense can hide. This was not a national treasure, the way a king's crown is a treasure, a thing that gives its owner pride and power. It was closer to a live current, with a covering thrown over it, and more than once the covering slipped. When the Philistines captured it in that lost battle, they set it in the temple of their own god, Dagon, as a trophy. The next morning, the statue of Dagon had fallen on its face before the chest. They stood it up again. The morning after that, the statue lay broken, head and hands snapped off on the threshold. Then, a sickness moved through their cities, city after city, until their own priests begged the rulers to send the thing back to the people it came from and be rid of it. They loaded it on a new cart pulled by 2 cows and let it go, and it rolled back into the land of the people who had lost it, into a town called Beth Shemesh at harvest. The men there were glad, and then some of them looked into it, or too near into it, and were struck down, and the joy in the field turned to a funeral. 1 Samuel chapter 6 sets it down without softening the number. The survivors asked, "Who is able to stand before this holy God?" That is a question the story never fully lets go of. Years later, when a new king wanted the chest brought up to his capital, they made the same mistake the Philistines had made. They set it on a cart. They did what seemed reasonable and modern and efficient, And they forgot that the command had always been that men carry it on their shoulders, never wheels, never oxen, never a shortcut. The oxen stumbled. A man named Uzzah, walking beside the cart, put out his hand to steady the chest so it would not fall. And he died there in the road, his hand still reaching. Read plainly that death is almost unbearable. The man was trying to help. The instinct was decent, and the record does not flinch from it in 2 Samuel chapter 6, where the king who ordered the move is left angry and then afraid, and stops the whole procession and refuses to bring the chest any further for 3 months. What happened at that cart was not a tragic accident of bad footing. It was a verdict handed down in the only court that outranks good intentions. The lesson written into it is severe, and it is consistent with everything the chest had already done in Philistine hands. This object did not respond to sincerity. It responded to reverence, to obedience, to the exact terms under which a holy God had agreed to travel among people who could not survive an unmediated look at him. The chest was never the danger. The danger was forgetting what the chest carried. And a nation that could forget that even for the length of one ox cart was a nation whose grip on this thing was always going to be temporary. That grip held in one place, though, longer than anywhere else. It held in Jerusalem, behind a wall of stone, in the dark room built to hold it. The temple took 7 years to build, and it was built at its heart around an empty room. Everything else in it was decoration and approach. The bronze, the cedar, the carved pomegranates, the pillars with names, the courts and the lamps and the tables. All of it led inward toward a single windowless chamber at the back, a perfect cube of a room, its walls plated in gold, its doors of olive wood carved with the same winged figures that were worked into the lid of the chest, the most holy place. And into that room, on the day the temple was dedicated, the priests carried the ark and set it down beneath the outstretched wings of 2 enormous carved figures that filled the chamber wall to wall. 1 Kings chapter 8 records the moment the priests came out. A cloud filled the house, so thick that they could not stand to minister, because the glory had filled the temple. Then the doors closed on the dark, and the chest was where it was meant to be, at rest, at the center of the nation's whole reason for being. The same record adds one small telling note about the poles. They were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place just in front of the inner room, though they could not be seen from outside. And the writer says they are there to this day. It is the language of a witness describing something still in its place at the time of writing. The poles were still through the rings. The chest was still where the priests had set it. As far as the man recording it knew, nothing had moved. It is the last living glimpse the text gives of it in its own house. A phrase meaning it is still here, written by someone who assumed it always would be. This is the last place the record sets it down with certainty. Everything before this point is a map with the chest marked on it. Sinai, the Jordan, Jericho, Shiloh, the Philistine cities, Beth Shemesh, the threshing floor where Uzzah died, the city of David, and now here, the inner room of Solomon's temple. Every stop named, every carrying recorded. After this, the map has no more marks. The kings come and go. The temple is robbed and repaired and robbed again by kings who need to buy off invaders with its gold. Reformers tear down idols and cleanse the courts, And in all of it, across roughly 400 years of history that follows the temple in detail, the chest behind the curtain is almost never mentioned again. It is not that the writers grow careless. They still count the smaller vessels. They still record the bronze and the basins, but the one thing at the center, the thing they had followed so exactly for so long, slips into a silence that never really breaks. The last certain home is a dark room the size of a small cube, sealed behind olive wood doors, its location known and its contents unseen. And the strange truth of this whole story is that the record leaves the chest there and then walks away from it, as though the writers themselves had lost the thread they had held so tightly for so long. The next time the great enemy comes to empty that temple down to the last spoon, the most important object in it has already gone quiet. And that quiet is where the mystery actually begins. Babylon kept lists. That is the detail almost everyone misses, and it is the hinge the whole disappearance turns on. When the empire finally broke Jerusalem and stripped the temple, it did not smash and grab in a fog. Its scribes were bureaucrats of plunder. They inventoried what they took, and the biblical record preserves their accounting with a precision that is almost comic in its thoroughness. The great bronze pillars, broken up and hauled off as scrap metal, the weight of the bronze too great to measure. The bronze sea and its stands, the pots, the shovels, the wick trimmers, the dishes, the bowls, and then, item by item, the smaller things, the basins and the fire pans, the sprinkling bowls, the golden this and the silver that, counted out and carried away and written down, because an empire that conquered by ledger did not lose track of gold. The list is long. The list is exact. The list reaches all the way down to the temple spoons, and the Ark of the Covenant is not on it. The single most valuable object in that entire building, a chest overlaid in gold with a solid gold lid, the thing every prior conqueror had lunged for, is missing from an inventory that stooped to record the trimming knives. The Babylonians took the forks and left no mention of the throne. Either the most careful looters in the ancient world overlooked the one thing they would have wanted most, which strains belief past breaking, or it was not there to take. That absence is not a gap in the story. It is the loudest fact in it. Consider how loud that silence really is. Prophets living through those years cried over everything that was lost. They named the burning of the house, the breaking of the walls, the carrying away of the vessels, the shame of a people marched off in chains. They mourned in detail, and they did not spare themselves the worst of it. And not one of them stands in the ashes and cries out that the enemy has taken the ark. For a people whose entire worship circled that one chest, the absence of that particular scream is deafening. Men who wept over stolen basins had nothing to say about a stolen throne. The most natural lament in the world, and it never comes, because there was nothing there to lament. Silence in a careless record proves nothing. Things fall out of a sloppy account all the time, but silence inside a meticulous account is itself a piece of evidence. When a ledger that counts spoons does not count the ark, the ledger is telling the truth about something. And the truth it is telling is that by the time Babylon came for the gold at the center was already gone. The chest did not vanish in the fire and the plunder. It was gone before the enemy ever reached the inner room, gone quietly, in a way that left no entry to record and no witness to name the day. Here, the story stops being a history and becomes a mystery. Not with a theft anyone saw, with an empty line on an enemy's careful list. And from that empty line, over the centuries that followed, 3 answers grew. 3 claims about where a throne can hide, when even its captors cannot find it. The first of them lives on the far side of a continent, in a country that says it has held the chest, unbroken, for close to 3,000 years. There is a small chapel in the city of Axum, in the highlands of Ethiopia, ringed by a fence, and the tradition surrounding it is stated with total conviction. Inside, the tradition holds, rests the Ark of the Covenant. It is guarded by a single monk, a guardian who is chosen for life, who once he takes the role never again leaves the enclosure and never again steps outside the fence. When he is near death, he names his successor, and the chest passes from one lifelong keeper to the next, and no one else is permitted to see it. Not scholars, not clergy from elsewhere, not the faithful who come and stand at the fence. No one. The story of how it came there is woven deep into the identity of a whole nation. The tradition tells of a queen from that land who traveled to Jerusalem in the days of Solomon, of a son born from that meeting, and of that son returning to his mother's country as a man, bringing the chest with him, either with permission or by a holy substitution, depending on who tells it. For the Ethiopian church, this is not a legend on the edge of belief. It is the center of it, celebrated in festivals, carried in processions where wrapped replicas stand in for the original, sung about, guarded, and believed, with a seriousness that has lasted longer than most nations have existed. The devotion is not vague. Every church in that tradition holds its own consecrated replica of the chest, wrapped in cloth. And once a year, those replicas are carried out on the heads of priests in a great procession to water, in a festival that fills whole cities with drums and white robes and song. A public act of memory, reaching back to the day, the tradition says, the true one arrived. The whole shape of that faith is built around the claim that the original is real and near and here, and at the heart of all of it sits the one chapel, the one fence, the one guardian, and the one chest no living person outside that role has ever been allowed to see. And it cannot be checked. That is the shape of this first claim, and honesty requires naming the shape plainly. It is a tradition held with real devotion that never allows itself to be tested. The one object that would settle it is behind a fence, watched by a man sworn never to reveal it, in a claim that is structured from the ground up, so that verification is impossible. That does not make it false. Faith and history are not always the same road, and a thing can be true and still be hidden. But it does mean this. What stands in Axum is a claim that asks to be believed rather than shown. And the moment anyone asks to see it, the claim closes like a hand. It is the most confident of the 3 answers and the least reachable, and those 2 facts live side by side and never touch. The second answer does not send anyone across a continent. It says the chest never left home at all. It says the ark is in Jerusalem, under Jerusalem, sealed in the rock beneath the very mount where the temple once stood. This theory begins from the character of the priests themselves and the tunnels they knew. The Temple Mount was not solid stone, all the way down. Beneath it ran cisterns and channels and cut passages, some for water, some for drainage. A hidden architecture below the floor where the sacrifices were made. The men who served there knew that underworld the way a family knows the crawl spaces of its own house. And this second theory imagines that in the last days before the city fell, with the Babylonian army closing and the end no longer in doubt, the priests did the one thing priests would do. They did not let the throne of God be dragged off in a foreign wagon. They took it down into the rock, into a chamber prepared or discovered beneath the holy place. And they sealed it, and they died with the secret. And the fire passed over an empty room because the true thing had already gone underground. There is even a thread of older tradition that leans this way. A memory that one of the faithful kings, generations before the end, had already given a command that the chest be placed in the house and not carried on shoulders through the streets again, as though its days of traveling were quietly being brought to a close. If the throne had already been settled, fixed, meant never to move again, then the step from a fixed place above the floor to a sealed place below it is a short one, taken by men who had run out of time and options. It is, of the three, the theory that fits the silence best. It explains the missing entry on the Babylonian list without sending the chest to another hemisphere. It keeps the object exactly where the whole story says it belonged, at the center, and simply moves it a few floors down. If the ark was hidden beneath the mount before the looters ever reached the sanctuary, then of course it is not on their inventory because they never touched it, and it is the theory that can never be dug up. The ground it points to is the single most contested piece of earth on the planet, sacred at once to more than one faith, watched and walled and fought over, where no shovel can go down without the whole world holding its breath. No archaeology can reach that supposed chamber without tearing at wounds that have not healed in a very long time. So the second answer, like the first, ends at a door that will not open, though this door is not guarded by one monk on a mountain, but by the weight of the whole world pressing on a few acres of stone. The chest, if it is there, is hidden in plain sight, beneath the feet of everyone who argues about it, in the one place on earth no one is allowed to disturb. The third answer is the strangest, because it does not come from a living tradition or a buried city. It comes from a book. There is an old text, written in the centuries between the fall of the temple and the coming of Christ, that most Bibles either place in a separate section or leave out entirely, a book called 2nd Maccabees. And in its second chapter it tells a small, deliberate story about the chest. It says that the prophet Jeremiah, warned by God before the destruction came, took the tent of meeting and the ark and the altar of incense, and carried them out of the city, and climbed the mountain that Moses had once climbed, to look across into the promised land he would never enter. There, the text says, Jeremiah found a hollow cave, and he brought the chest and the tent inside, and he sealed the entrance. Some who had followed came back later to mark the path, and could not find it, and Jeremiah rebuked them, and said the place would remain unknown until God gathered his people again and showed his mercy, and the glory returned. It is worth being exact about what this claim is and is not. This is not a verse from the Hebrew Scriptures. 2nd Maccabees stands outside the Hebrew Bible, and honesty about the trail means saying that clearly and keeping it said. It is an ancient account of the hiding, not the account of the God who inspired the prophets. But it is old, and it is specific, and it carries an echo that the other two theories do not. because the mountain it names is not Sinai, where the covenant was first given. It is Nebo, the height described in Deuteronomy chapter 34, where Moses stood at the end of his life and saw the land from a distance and died there. And no man knows the place of his grave to this day. This is the haunting symmetry of the third answer. There is even a strange fittingness to the choice of prophet, because the tradition around Jeremiah is that he warned a people who would not listen right up to the end, and it would be like him to save the holiest thing in the nation quietly, alone, while everyone else argued, and then tell no one where. It hides the ark on the same mountain where God once hid a body. It puts the throne of the covenant in a cave on the peak where the man who carried the law came to the end of his road and vanished from the map. Buried by God himself in a grave no one has ever found. If the second theory is the most likely, and the first is the most confident, the third is the most poetic. An unfindable chest laid to rest beside an unfindable grave, both of them sealed by the deliberate hand of a God who does not always want to be dug up. And like the others, it ends where all three end, at a door that stays shut in a place no one has ever confirmed. So there are the three answers, and the honest thing is to lay them on the table together and refuse to pretend that any of them is more than it is. Here is what the text actually says. It says the ark was built, carried, feared, captured, returned, and set at last in the inner room of Solomon's temple. That is written, and it is firm. It says the chest was there when the doors closed on the glory, and it does not clearly say it there again after. When Babylon came and counted the plunder, the ark is not in the count. Those are the facts the biblical record gives, and they stop exactly where the mystery starts. Here is what tradition added, and it must be named as addition, not as text. The claim of Ethiopia, that the chest was carried south in the days of Solomon and has been guarded in Axum ever since, is a tradition ancient and beloved, and stated as certainty by those who hold it. The book of 2nd Maccabees, that Jeremiah hid it in a cave on Mount Nebo, is a claim from a text outside the Hebrew scriptures. These are not lies, but they are not the same kind of statement as the sentence that says it stood in the temple. One is scripture, the others are what grew up around the silent scripture left. And here is what remains, honestly, in debate. Was the chest captured and melted for its gold, its history ending anonymously in a Babylonian furnace, with no scribe bothering to note that this particular gold had once been a throne? Was it hidden by the priests beneath the mount and sealed in the rock? Was it carried out by a prophet before the end? Was it taken south generations earlier than anyone else supposes? Or was it, from the beginning, never meant to be found again, quietly retired the moment its work was finished? Serious people hold each of these, and no shovel and no fence and no ancient page has ever closed the question. The one thing that cannot honestly be said is that anyone knows. The trail the Bible leaves runs to the door of the most holy place and stops, and every road past that door runs into the dark. Which raises the question the mystery has been quietly hiding the whole time. Not where the chest went, what the chest was. Strip away the treasure hunt for a moment, and look at what the object was actually for. It was not a weapon, though armies borrowed it like one and were punished for it. It was not a talisman of national luck, though a losing army once dragged it into camp as if it were. It was not, at its heart, even the most precious thing inside a temple full of gold. Its value was never in its metal. It was a container, and then it was a lid, and the two did very different work. Inside the chest were the tokens of a story, the 2 stone tablets of the law, the commandments given at Sinai, the standard the whole nation had already broken and would break again. A jar of the bread from heaven that had fed them in the desert, the memory of a mercy they had grumbled against even while they ate it, and a staff, a dead branch that had bloomed overnight to settle a rebellion, a rod that budded to prove whom God had chosen. Law they had broken, bread they had complained about, a leadership they had resented. The inside of the ark was honestly a record of human failure, sealed in gold. And above all of that lay the lid. The lid had a name of its own, and the name is the key to everything. It was called the mercy seat, the place of atonement. The 2 winged figures arched their wings over it and bowed their faces toward it, toward an empty space above the gold, and that empty space was the point. It was the place where God said he would meet the people, not out in the open where the broken law would simply condemn them. Here, above the lid, over the very box that held the evidence against them, at a spot covered by mercy. And once a year, on the one day the high priest was allowed through the curtain into the dark, he did not come empty-handed. He came with blood. He came with the blood of a sacrifice, and Leviticus chapter 16 describes him sprinkling it on the mercy seat and before it, so that the covering over the broken law was also a covering stained with the life of something that had died in the people's place. And on that same day, a second animal stood waiting outside. The high priest laid his hands on its head and confessed over it everything the nation had done, and it was driven away into the wilderness, carrying the guilt off where no one would follow. 2 animals for one problem. One died, so its blood could cover the law on the mercy seat. One lived so it could carry the sin away and be gone. Payment on the gold inside, and removal into the desert outside. 2 halves of a single answer to the same unbearable question the men of Beth Shemesh had already asked. Who is able to stand before this holy God? That is what the ark actually was. It was the one spot on the earth where the broken law and the blood of atonement met in the same square foot of gold. Underneath, the record of guilt. On top, the seat of mercy. Between them, the blood. It was never a device for winning battles or a prize for a museum. It was a meeting place, engineered by God, where justice and mercy could occupy the same location without one destroying the other. The wonder of it was never the gold on the outside. The wonder was that a holy God found a way to sit down over a pile of human failure and call it a mercy seat, which means the whole question of where it went has been standing on the wrong foot the entire time. The throne of God on earth did not need a hiding place chosen by frightened men. Consider what the search has always assumed. It assumes that the ark's disappearance is a loss, a thing gone missing, a treasure that slipped through history's fingers and waits somewhere to be recovered so that everything can be put right. The whole treasure hunt runs on the idea that the chest is a possession, the world misplaced. But the record never treated it as a possession. It treated it as a presence with terms. It struck down men who reached for it with good intentions. It broke idols and emptied cities that tried to own it. It refused every attempt to reduce it to property. An object like that does not get lost the way a crown gets lost. An object like that leaves when its work is done. And there is the answer to the first thing this story asked to be held. The verse where the trail goes cold is 1 Kings chapter 8, the doors closing on the glory in the temple, and the silence after it is not the silence of something stolen. It is the silence of something that had said what it came to say. The mercy seat existed to show, year after bloody year, that a holy God would meet sinful people over a covering paid for in blood. It was a promise in gold, a rehearsal repeated until the thing it rehearsed arrived. And there is the answer to the second thing. The three places. Ethiopia holds it by tradition and will not show it. The mount holds it by theory and will not be dug. The cave holds it by an outside book and cannot be found. Scripture itself leans toward none of the three. It does something stranger. It lets the chest go quiet without a funeral, because by the end of the story the chest is no longer the point, and a book that once counted its every step stops counting because the thing the steps were leading to has come. And that is the third thing, the one almost no one asks. What the ark truly was matters more than where it went, because the mercy seat was never meant to stay a lid on a box in a dark room. It was a picture waiting for a person, a place where blood covered broken law, pointing forward to the day when the blood would not be sprinkled by a trembling priest once a year, but poured out once by one who was himself both the sacrifice and the seat of mercy, in the open, in daylight, where the whole world could see. The chest is not the treasure that got away. The chest was the arrow, and the arrow found its mark, and an arrow that has struck home does not need to be followed anymore. So the honest ending of this trail is not a location, it is a recognition, and it leaves one thing to ask, not about a cave or a fence or a chamber in the rock, but about the mercy seat itself. Where does a person stand today if the meeting place of judgment and mercy is no longer a box behind a curtain, but an open invitation? That is worth a comment below, wherever this finds you, because the whole trail, all of it, was leading here. Every step of it, the desert and the river and the dark inner room, the terror at the cart and the silence on the enemy's list, all of it circled one small, impossible truth, that a holy God wanted to be near people who could not survive being near him. And so he built a place where his justice and his mercy could rest in the same spot, over the evidence of everything they had done wrong, covered by blood. The ark was that place made of gold and wood. It could be captured, it could be hidden, it could go quiet and drop off the map and become a mystery argued over for 3,000 years. But the thing it stood for could not be lost, because the thing it stood for stopped being a box and became a cross. The broken law, the blood that covers it, the mercy that meets you over the very record of your failure, none of that is sealed in a cave on some mountain or locked behind a fence at the far side of a continent. It is offered now in the open to anyone who will stop searching the horizon and simply come. The mercy seat was never the treasure. It was the promise. And the promise has a name. If something in this has moved past curiosity and reached the place where you know the search was never really about a golden chest, then do not let this moment pass with only wonder. whisper it, or write it where these words have found you, and mean it. Lord Jesus, I belong to you. You alone are the Savior of my soul. Say it, and the meeting place of judgment and mercy is no longer a lost object at the edge of a map. It is the ground you are standing on. The trail the Bible leaves does go cold, but only because it was never leading to a place. It was leading to Him.